Silverton, Oregon's Frank Razor bought a 6-week-old bobtailed Scotch collie for $5. Bobby, the 6-week-old puppy, was destined to become one of the most famous dogs of his time.
His story is inspirational and heart-touching. It is accessible right near the Silverton coffee shop. He sits as a statue with his little house as people of all ages stop by to read his journey off the murals.
About 1 year after getting Bobby, the Brazier family moved from their home on the farm to downtown Silverton. Knowing Bobby wouldn't like the city life, they sold him to a friend who would be living on their old farm.
But this didn't stop him from visiting his family. In fact, on the weekends, Bobby would walk to Silverton to be with his owners and then walk back to the farm on Monday. This is just one example of Bobby's loyal personality.
The same summer, Mr. and Mrs. Brazier packed up and left Silverton on a trip across the country. When they stopped at Wilcott, Indiana to get some gas.
While Bobby was taking a stretch break, a gang of street dogs jumped him. He ran off to escape the mutts. His family tried desperately to find.
Distraught, the Braziers stayed to look for him. They drove around town, honking and whistling, hoping he would run up to them. Finally, giving up at midnight, they returned home. To help, the local telephone operator called everyone in town to ask if they'd seen the missing Bobby. The editor of the newspaper wrote an advertisement that ran for 3 weeks. Weeks went by and there was still no sign of Bobby. Sadly, they continued their trip, leaving word about the missing dog along the way.
On the way back to Silverton, they told as many people as they could to try and keep an eye out for Bobby. They would even pay to get him home.
6 months later, the youngest Brazier was walking down the streets of Silverton and coincidentally bumped into a scrawny dog with his fur matted, paws worn out, and muscles extremely sore. As you may have guessed, this dog was Bobby. He had traveled 2,800 miles to get back home to his family and met many wonderful people along the way.
He stopped at homes for scraps and food scraps and healing wounds. And this woman nursed Bobby after he got a huge gash from an accident that happened.
Very quickly, his unbelievable story was shared all across the world. Bobby was praised by the town of Silverton and was awarded the key to the city, presented a silver medal from the Oregon Humane Society, and was featured in multiple magazines and newspapers. He was known as Bobby the Wonder Dog.
After his amazing journey, he lived to be 6 years old and break a record by having 16 puppies, all of them male. Bobby lived an amazing life and did many things.
Hello, today we are discussing the Oregon Garden.
Here you will learn about the history of the Oregon Garden. You will hear fun facts, timelines, and more.
The idea of developing a botanical garden began in the 1940s and mid-1990s. The site was selected to be in Silverton.
In 2001, June 29th to July 3rd, they had their grand opening celebration of the Oregon Garden. And the Silverton Market Garden was created, and 7 years later, they even opened a resort in October of 2008.
In 2011, the Oregon Garden celebrated their 10-year anniversary, and a year later, the Fire Safety House is created. Not long ago, in 2014, the Discovery Pavilion grand opening was held on October 2nd.
A public showcase garden had been conceived at least 1940s work towards the realization, and concept began in earnest around 1990 with the land dedicated in 1995. A partnership between the Oregon Association of Nurserymen and the City of Silverton created the garden with other support coming from the Oregon Forest Resources Institute and the Oregon Youth Conservation Corps, the American Conifer Society, and the Oregon timber industry.
In April 1996, a master plan was created for the garden, which includes ultimately developing all 240 acres of the site. The groundbreaking ceremony occurred June 27, 1997, and featured high-ranking Oregon politicians. The garden opened to the public during a dedication on April 17, 1999.
Subsequent ceremonies dedicated additional features such as Gordon House on March 2, 2002, and the Rediscovery Forest and Natural Resources Center on June 7, 2002. Also in 2002, the Water Garden won an award for the American Society of Landscape Architects for environmental friendliness.
In conclusion, the Oregon Garden is popular and well known to many people who live in Oregon and is open year-round to anyone who wants to visit.
Well, that is all we can tell you for now. To find out more, visit the Oregon Garden.
Up at the Oregon Gardens, there is a gorgeous house located on your way up to the resort. This house looks futuristic yet simple, made with only wood, concrete, limestone, and other natural organic materials.
The elegant house was made by the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright was known for his Usonian homes.
This Usonian method was the art of freeness and futuristicness, and simple all at the same time.
The house was first designed in 1957 for Evelyn and Conrad Gordon. The house finished being built in 1963.
Wright never got to see the house finished since he passed away. The house is 2,133 square feet.
After living in the house for 38 years, the Gordons planned on destroying the house.
When the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy dismantled the house and moved it from around Wilsonville to the Oregon Gardens in Silverton, Oregon.
21 miles from its original location, after the house was dismantled, there was mandatory refurbishing on structure, siding, roofing, and a new foundation replicating the original house.
Now the house can be toured and used for weddings and meetings. Frank Lloyd Wright was born on June 8, 1867, and passed away April 9th, in 1959.
Wright had passed away before the house was finished being built. He was one of the most well-known architects ever.
All throughout the town of Silverton, we have many murals that represent something to us. Sprinkled around town, there are about 21 murals painted on the sides of buildings to share the memories to everybody. 2 murals we chose to look into were
The veteran mural is a way to honor Vince Till and all the work he did for Silverton Mural Society. It also is a way to honor him and everyone else that served their country.
the old oak symbol of the old oak tree that ran right down the middle of Main Street. Eventually, they had to chop it down because they needed to pave the street, and the stump is still there behind the Silverton Museum.
Some artists such as Kelly Farah, Lori Lee Webb, Tanya Smithberg, Norman Rockwell, and many more created all the astonishing murals around Silverton.
One recently painted mural was of Orville N. Roth when he passed away. He was a man that made a lot of history in this town. He opened the first Roth store here.
We choose to create murals in town to attract tourists who want to come and view all Silverton's beauty. They also have made them because it simply makes the town a little nicer.
But some people might wonder where we are getting the money to supply for the murals. In the past months, we moved our 4 murals to a new location. It said the committee is looking at allocating $4,000 from available urban renewal district money, not the general tax fund. Statesman Journal.
So people all around town will find some extra funds to supply to make the great artwork. Living in such a small town with about 21 murals, it is truly amazing that we have that many memorable moments.
Silverton, a small, quaint slice of history. With its 9,000 population and the 4th city in the state of Oregon, it's quite a big small town.
It's generally overlooked when people are more interested in other larger cities, like Portland, Salem, and Oregon City.
It's how I would describe it, a shopping mall. There's electronic stores, pharmacies, grocery stores, you name it. And it's not just the places that make Silverton, Silverton, but the people and animals.
We have had Homer Davenport, a political cartoonist, the first openly transgender mayor in the nation, and Bobby, a dog who travels across from Indiana to Silverton.
And Silverton is a painter's paradise. There are murals all across the city, all there in their glory.
Today we will talk about the first murals in Silverton, the Freedom Murals. Norman Rockwell painted these 4 pictures and were faithfully recreated in Silverton.
The 4 freedoms were inspired by a speech given by Franklin D. Roosevelt that Norman Rockwell attended. The murals were created in order to celebrate Silverton's 50th anniversary.
They each describe a freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom of fear.
The first one, Freedom of Speech, depicts a man standing up in what appears to be a court.
The second one, the Freedom of Worship, shows people praying in church.
The next freedom, Freedom from Want, depicts a family at a Thanksgiving table with a bunch of food.
And the final mural made by Norman was Freedom from Fear. It shows a child in bed, a mother at his side, and a father looking over a child with a newspaper in hand.
But these murals were taken down in 2015 in order to make way for the new MAPS building. It would have cost too much to move the original, in fact, $92,000.
So they decided to repaint the murals, while searching, they found the perfect place, the Seven Brides building.
The owner was okay with the painting and gave $2,000 for each painting, and are being painted by Tonya Smithsburg. There's no date to when the murals will be finished, but so far it looks good.
People in Silverton often have their heads in the clouds. However, this particular citizen went up above the theoretical clouds to become a world-famous astronaut.
There are many murals throughout the city, all with significant purposes and connections with Silverton and its people. However, out of all of them, one truly stands out as a huge piece of Silverton's history.
The Donald Pettit astronaut mural. This piece of art is commemorating a hometown hero who just happens to be the fourth most famous and efficient astronaut in history of the United States, Donald Pettit.
Pettit grew up in Silverton, Oregon, and went to Silverton Union High School before moving on to Oregon State University, where he became a chemical engineer.
He's a veteran of 3 space flights and has lodged more than 370 days in space and over 13 spacewalk hours.
He lived aboard the International Space Station for 5.5 months during Expedition 6, was a member of the STS-126 crew, and again lived aboard the station for 6.5 months as part of the Expedition 3031 crew.
He was a member of the Synthesis Group, a presidential commission led by LT General Tom Stafford with the job of assembling the technology to return to the moon and explore Mars, and was a member of the Space Station Freedom redesign team.
Dr. Pettit did scientific research and captured the first commercial cargo spacecraft, the SpaceX Dragon D1, using a robotic arm.
He also was a space photographer and took many photos from above. During his career, Pettit became one of the first Americans to land aboard Chiron's spacecraft.
And while up in space, in remembrance, he even took the opportunity to look down on Silverton from up above.
Paula McGee first knew she wanted to become a dance instructor when she was about 19 and knew she liked to teach kids more than performing.
She actually grew up in the LA area in California and went to college for a short period of time. She got her first job when her professor, who owned a dance studio with his wife, asked her to teach a few classes.
As she got older, she was ready to move out of busy LA area and start her own studio.
Since she was an only child, her closest family member was her cousin, who had been living in the Silverton area for a few years.
She was the one to introduce her to the small town of Silverton. That, at the time, had no dance studio. Paula was sold right away.
She rented a big old ballroom in the upstairs on the corner of Main Street and First Street. She knew that it was perfect for her classes.
Once she was ready to open her studio, Paula put an advertisement in the paper saying she would have an open house before classes would start.
Only a few families came as expected, and that first year was slow as well. She taught whoever came in the door and all by herself.
She stayed in that building for 2 years and moved to a building on High Street after the owners of the building decided they wanted to do something else with it.
She also stayed in that building on High Street for only 2 years. Then she bought the building on Oak Street.
She described the building as a wreck when they bought it and fixed it up to the building it is today. The Silverton Ballet and Performing Arts has been in business for 26 years and will continue for many more to come.